Mark arrived 20 minutes early. Not because he was eager, but because being late felt like a mistake he couldn't afford. He sat in his car, engine off, watching trucks back into loading docks one after another. The warehouse loomed in front of him, a massive concrete box with no windows, no personality, and no sign that anyone inside cared who came or went. This was supposed to be a fresh start. Mark had taken the job after 2 months of unanswered applications, short interviews, and polite rejections. The recruiter told him the warehouse was fast-paced but fair. Good overtime. Weekly pay. Benefits after probation. Nothing about people. When he finally stepped out of the car, the cold air hit his face. He adjusted his jacket, grabbed his lunch bag, and walked toward the entrance with the same tight feeling in his chest he always had before something unknown. Inside, the noise swallowed him immediately. Forklifts beeped. Conveyors rattled. Scanners chirped non-stop. Voices echoed but never lingered long enough to feel human. The air smelled like cardboard dust and oil, the kind of smell that sticks to clothes and follows you home. At a small desk near the entrance sat a man in a wrinkled polo shirt scrolling through his phone. "You the new guy?" he asked without looking up. Mark nodded. "Yeah. Mark." The man sighed, stood up slowly, and handed him a neon vest. "Rick. Supervisor. Clock in over there. Grab a scanner. Just stick close to someone and don't slow the line." That was the orientation. No safety briefing. No tour. No explanation of expectations. Rick was already walking away before Mark could ask his first question. Mark stood there for a moment, vest in his hands, unsure if he was missing something. Then someone brushed past him, nearly knocking the vest out of his grip. "Move, man," the worker muttered. Mark put the vest on and followed the flow. The first hour felt like trying to read a book while running. Screens flashed numbers and instructions he didn't fully understand. Workers scanned items without looking at the screens anymore, their hands moving on muscle memory alone. Mark stopped to read, to double-check, and every pause felt like a spotlight on him. Someone behind him clicked their tongue. "Come on." He sped up, made a mistake, corrected it, and felt his face burn. No one introduced themselves. No one offered help. If Mark asked a question, the answer came short and irritated. "You'll get it. Just do what it says." "That's not my section." By lunch, his shoulders ached and his confidence was already cracked. In the break room, clusters of workers sat together, laughing, phones out, food spread across tables. Mark sat alone, unwrapped his sandwich, and listened. They talked about overtime tricks. About which supervisors to avoid. About people who didn't last. No one talked to him. When the break ended, no one told him. He noticed only because everyone stood up at once. The afternoon was worse. Rick passed by occasionally, glancing at Mark's screen with visible annoyance. "You're behind," he said once. Mark opened his mouth to explain, but Rick was already gone. By the end of the shift, Mark's scanner showed numbers that didn't look good. Rick stopped him near the exit. "You need to be faster," Rick said. "We don't babysit here." Mark nodded, apologized, and left. In the parking lot, he sat in his car again, this time with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He told himself it was just the first day. That night, Mark dreamed of scanners beeping non-stop. The next morning, nothing was different. No one checked on him. No one trained him. The pace didn't slow. But something else started to form, something subtle. When Mark picked a pallet, someone else would suddenly need that exact space. When he asked which task to prioritize, he got different answers from different people. When mistakes happened, his name came up quickly. By the end of the week, Mark felt like he was always one step behind, and everyone else knew exactly why. But no one said it out loud. On Friday, something small happened. Mark followed instructions exactly as they appeared on his scanner. Halfway through the task, a worker named Jason walked by and laughed. "You're actually doing that?" Jason said. "Doing what?" Mark asked. "That order. You're not supposed to touch it yet." "That's what my scanner says." Jason shrugged. "Good luck explaining that." At the end of the shift, Rick pulled Mark aside again. "You messed up the sequence," he said. Mark explained. Rick stared at him like he didn't care. "You should know better by now." That was the moment something shifted inside Mark. Not anger. Not fear. Confusion. Because he realized no one had ever told him how to know better. Mark went home that night and seriously considered quitting. But rent was due. Bills were waiting. And quitting without another job felt like jumping without knowing where you'd land. So he set his alarm. And came back. By the third week, Mark stopped counting days. Not because time moved fast, but because every shift felt the same. Long, heavy. Endless. The warehouse had a way of erasing time. No windows. No clocks you could trust. Just the rhythm of machines and the constant pressure to move faster than your body wanted to. Mark arrived early again, like always. He had learned that arriving exactly on time meant starting already stressed. Early gave him a few quiet minutes to breathe. But even early didn't feel safe anymore. As he walked in, he noticed something new. Conversations stopped when he passed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable. A pause. A glance. Then voices continued, lower than before. He told himself he was imagining it. Mark's assignment started changing without explanation. One day he was picking. The next day, loading. Then inventory, a job that required experience he didn't have. When he asked Rick why he kept getting moved, Rick shrugged. "Wherever we need you." But Mark noticed something important. Everyone else had a routine. Everyone else had a place. Only him. Mistakes became inevitable. Inventory numbers didn't match because someone had scanned items incorrectly before Mark ever touched them. But Mark was the one holding the scanner when the error was discovered. Rick called him out in front of everyone. "You're costing us time," Rick said loudly. Mark felt every eye on him. No one defended him. No one even looked surprised. That night, Mark didn't sleep. The break room was where Mark learned how the warehouse really worked. Not from instructions, but from silence. There was a table near the windowless wall where the same group always sat. Jason. Mike. Aaron. They laughed loudly, complained about management, and somehow never got in trouble. They also decided who belonged. Mark once made the mistake of sitting near them. The conversation stopped. Jason looked at him, then at the others. "You lost?" he asked. Mark stood up, embarrassed, and moved. From that day on, he ate alone. The pressure wasn't just physical. It was mental. One morning, Mark was told to stay late for overtime. He agreed. He needed the money. At the end of the shift, Rick asked him why he was still there. "You weren't approved," Rick said. Mark explained the conversation. Rick shook his head. "No one told you that. The overtime was denied." Another day, Mark was blamed for a pallet placed in the wrong zone. Security footage later showed someone else moving it, but no correction was ever made to Mark's record. Every time Mark tried to defend himself, the response was the same. "You're overthinking it. Don't be so sensitive. That's how this place works." Slowly, Mark began doubting his own memory. Mark stopped talking unless necessary. He stopped asking questions. He followed instructions exactly, and still got blamed. When new hires arrived, they were warned away from him without a single word being spoken. Mark saw it happen. A look. A shake of the head. New people stopped standing near him. He had become marked. One night shift, everything collapsed. A high-priority shipment went out incomplete. Management panicked. Emails were sent. Supervisors were angry. Rick pulled Mark into the office. "Your badge scanned this section last," Rick said. Mark stared at the screen. "Yes," he said slowly, "because I was told to stop and move to another task." "By who?" "Mark named Jason." Rick leaned back in his chair. Jason denied it. And just like that, the story ended. Mark received a written warning. "One more mistake," they said. Mark sat in his car afterward, unable to turn the key. He thought about quitting. He thought about yelling. He thought about walking back inside and demanding answers. Instead, he did nothing. And that scared him the most. Because the warehouse hadn't just exhausted him. It had taught him to stay quiet. The next morning, something shifted. Mark brought a notebook. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. He wrote down times. Names. Exact words. When someone gave instructions, Mark repeated them out loud. "So you want me to stop picking and move to Zone C, correct?" People noticed. Jason laughed at him once. "You writing a novel now?" Mark didn't respond. But he kept writing. By the end of the week, Mark wasn't better treated. But he was different. More careful. More aware. Less broken. And for the first time since he started, the warehouse felt like something that could be understood. Not controlled. But exposed. By the time Mark realized his notebook had changed everything, it was already too late to stop. The first sign was subtle. On Monday morning, his usual scanner was gone. In its place was an older unit with a cracked screen and delayed response. Every scan lagged by half a second. It didn't sound like much, but in a warehouse where speed was everything, half a second was an eternity. Mark mentioned it to Rick. "Use what you're given," Rick said without looking up. Mark wrote it down. Mark's assignments became impossible. Not hard. Not challenging. Impossible. He was given zones that were understaffed, disorganized, and already behind before he arrived. Pallets stacked incorrectly. Labels missing. Items logged under old systems that no longer matched the scanner database. Any delay was blamed on him. Rick began hovering more often. "Why are you still here? What's taking so long? You need to focus." Mark noticed Rick never asked those questions when Jason or Mike were behind. The jokes stopped being jokes. Someone bumped into Mark by accident while he carried a heavy load. Someone shut down a conveyor belt while Mark was working, then blamed him for stopping production. Someone left trash in his work area and reported him for safety violations. Each incident was small enough to deny. Together, they were crushing. Mark stopped eating during breaks. His stomach stayed tight all shift anyway. At home, he barely spoke to anyone. He lay awake at night replaying conversations, wondering what he could have said differently, knowing deep down it wouldn't have mattered. Midweek, Rick called Mark into the office again. The door closed this time. Rick leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You're creating problems," he said. Mark stayed quiet. "You're making people uncomfortable. Writing things down. Asking for confirmations." Mark met his eyes. "I just want clarity." Rick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't that kind of place." Mark understood exactly what that meant. The next day, Mark's locker was emptied. Not stolen, just dumped on the floor. Gloves. Lunch bag. Notebook. The notebook was open. Someone had flipped through it. Mark picked it up slowly, hands shaking. No one said a word. Jason watched him from across the room, smiling. Friday night was the worst shift Mark had ever worked. A high-volume shipment arrived late. Management panicked. Supervisors barked orders that contradicted each other. Mark was told to stay in Zone D. Then told to move to loading. Then blamed for not finishing Zone D. He asked Rick to confirm instructions in writing. Rick's face hardened. "Are you refusing to work?" "No," Mark said carefully. "I'm asking for clarification." Rick turned away. At the end of the shift, Mark was written up again. Final warning. Something unexpected happened that night. As Mark walked to his car, a woman from inventory, someone he barely knew, caught up to him. "You're not crazy," she said quietly. Mark stopped. "I've seen this before," she continued. "They pick someone. Push them until they snap or quit." "Why?" Mark asked. She shrugged. "Control. Easier than fixing real problems." It wasn't much. But it mattered. By now, Mark's body was failing him. His hands trembled even off shift. His jaw stayed clenched. Loud noises made him flinch. One morning, he sat in his car unable to go inside. He almost drove away. Almost. Instead, he opened the notebook. And made a decision. Mark stopped confronting people. He stopped reacting. He documented silently. He photographed mislabeled pallets. He saved scanner logs. He requested copies of every write-up. He learned policies management hoped no one read. And slowly, patterns emerged. Not just against him. Against everyone they pushed out before. Mark wasn't safe. But he wasn't powerless anymore. The warehouse still thought he was alone. They were wrong. Mark didn't tell anyone what he was doing. That was the most important part. People in the warehouse talked too much. They vented, joked, threatened, bragged. That was how they got caught. Mark understood now that silence was protection. He kept showing up. On time. Calm. Professional. And it confused them. HR didn't appear suddenly. It crept in. First as an email asking for documentation related to overtime discrepancies. Then another requesting scanner logs from previous months. Then a quiet walkthrough by two people in clean clothes who didn't wear vests. People noticed. Jason noticed. Mike stopped joking. Aaron stopped showing up early. Rick started holding team meetings that felt more like warnings than conversations. "We're all under review," Rick said one morning. "So let's keep things clean." Mark wrote that down too. The same tactics used against Mark started bouncing back. Jason was questioned about conflicting instructions. Mike was asked why his productivity numbers spiked only when certain supervisors were on duty. Rick was asked to explain repeated write-ups issued without supporting documentation. The warehouse didn't explode. It tightened. People stopped laughing. Conversations went quiet. Eyes dropped when HR walked past. For the first time since Mark arrived, fear moved upward instead of down. Rick tried one final move. He called Mark into the office and closed the door. "You're not a good fit here," Rick said flatly. "This place isn't for everyone." Mark listened. He didn't argue. Rick slid a paper across the desk. Voluntary resignation. Mark looked at it, then back at Rick. "I'd like HR present for this conversation," Mark said. Rick's jaw tightened. That was the moment Mark knew it was over. Rick was gone 2 weeks later. No announcement. No explanation. His name simply disappeared from schedules. Jason was transferred to another location. Mike followed a month later. Aaron quit without notice. No one apologized to Mark. That part surprised him less than he thought it would. The warehouse didn't become a great place to work. It just became normal. Training improved. Write-ups required documentation. New hires weren't thrown into impossible zones anymore. Mark stayed. Not because he loved the job, but because he had earned the right to be there. And when new people arrived, nervous, quiet, unsure, Mark became the one who explained things. Not secrets. Not shortcuts. Just the rules. The real ones. Mark was never the same. He trusted slower now. He watched more. He spoke carefully. Some nights, scanner sound still echoed in his head when everything was quiet. But he had learned something most people never do. Toxic systems don't need monsters. They only need silence. One evening, Mark walked out of the warehouse as the sun set behind the building. Trucks still lined the docks. The work never stopped. But for the first time since his first day, Mark didn't feel small walking past it. He felt aware. And that was enough.